Good afternoon, everyone. I am calling to order this meeting of the Cleveland Heights City Council Housing and Building Committee at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, August 20th. Clerk Ballister, if you wouldn't mind, could you please call the roll?
Petrus.
Here.
Larson. Here. Maddox.
And just for the record, Councilman Maddox reached out saying that he is unable to join us. We also have Council President Kuda and Councilman Posh with us today. So first on our agenda is an overview of some of the Racial Justice Task Force recommendations. In talking with Director Zanth, we came up with the idea of slowly going through these month through month. And so I'm very grateful that he has taken time to look through some of them. And so I am going to turn it over to him.
Well, thank you, Chair and committee members. And we've brought a sort of a big team here because there's a lot of aspects to everything that's been proposed. So just for everyone's sake, we've got our Chief Housing Inspector, which is Messina. We, of course, have Director Butler, and we have Brian, Assistant Director Iorio. And Brian's here in particular because he had been, for many, many months, staffing the Racial Justice Task Force. So he knows some of the context that a lot of us don't know. And unfortunately, the law director couldn't be here today, but we met yesterday to sort of go over everything. And I think one thing we sort of want to talk about right off the bat is if you look at the PowerPoint presentation that the Justice Task Force gave in 2023, for the housing recommendations on the long-term recommendations, really one of the most important ones, and we know from history, was looking at a civil option. And you can see that through it's sort of a common thread through each of the proposed pieces of legislation. That's something that's quite complicated. It's got some more research that we'd like to do. We'd also like to suggest that the judge be invited because there's some stuff happening at the court already, which may or may not be a good thing, the diversion program in particular. So that is something that I think we want to save for maybe the next meeting.
Okay.
And, if you want to invite the judge, I think that would make it a lot better. But we also want to do some more research on it. But that being said, we can run through some of the recommendations. And I think the easiest way to do this is just in order. So the first one that was suggested is an amendment to notice based on ARPA funding of home repairs for residents who need financial help. So this was a proposed 1345-04A. Potentially that really just means a section between 04 and 05. And there's two subsections to that. The first one is that any notice given to an owner or an agent of a building having a violation, that should include a statement that we have programs available to aid the homeowner. So we thought that this is something that is a very good goal to have. It's not necessarily something that needs to be codified, and for two reasons. One is we actually have this on most of our forms, most of our violations. So when you get it, it says reach out to the HPO office or housing department for additional programs or help. The second reason why we think it's better not to put it into the code is because, I'm going to use an example, there's a tall grass violation. So according to this, we would say on that violation, we have resources to help you, when in fact, we don't. We don't have resources to help people cut their grass or deal with that violation. So not every violation are there resources available, or should there be resources available from the city. So rather than making it a requirement in the code, we think it's just something that we can improve upon, reiterate, and maybe just advertise a bit better.
Yeah, with outreach for the programs we have, we could do a better job of reaching out, putting it in the newsletter. There are certain letters where we don't want to have this information on it. Right? So if it basically says for all notification with a violation on it to have that information on it, if we're sending out a nuisance letter, we don't want to say, hey, we can help you take care of this nuisance, right? Or any other type of court notification, right? So to codify it, it seems like it's handcuffing us a little bit more than just putting it in as a sort of a intent that we're out there to help.
So I guess, is it fair to summarize this as saying that the good news is that we are already putting notice on a lot of the forums, and maybe there are some things like putting it in the newsletter to increase awareness that we could do?
Correct.
Okay.
The second sub-item here, this is going to be an example of the civil option where we want to hold it in abeyance for the next meeting, but I'll just read it for everyone's sake so you can see what we're getting at. The notice given to an owner or an agent shall also include the option for the inspector or city agent to choose to serve the owner, landlord, or agent a civil ticket with an appropriate fee as determined by the housing or building departments. So again, that's a civil option. We have some questions about, do we want to permit an inspector to be the person who makes that determination? We've got great inspectors now, but think about a time in the future when there is not a good inspector and they're making a choice to sift something from a criminal to a civil option. And this again is where we think that maybe the court is already doing some of this. So we want to, I think, explore with you and with them
Okay.
what that's all about. And I think the law director has similar thoughts, is that he wants to look at this a little bit further. Just another point, this is a legal point. If we shift something to a civil offense, it has a lower burden of proof. So when it's a criminal offense, it has to be a preponderance of evidence, whereas in a civil one, it just has to be
Yeah, what do you say, 51%? So criminal, we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil, I think it's a preponderance of 51%. So there's less of a burden that we have to prove to somebody. And eventually, you're going to have it's basically going to be a monetary fine in either kind of direction. So we're still having the monetary fine, but now we're given less of the burden of proof on us to prove it.
So meaning increased likelihood that someone is found responsible. So maybe more violations. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
If the
Probably.
burden is lower.
Right, an easier way to have that proven, right? It's only 51% according to the preponderance rate, whether or not you believe it or not. So I think the discussion of, right, who makes the decision, right? Is it something the court should make, is something the law department should make as far as a civil penalty? And then, right, what is the burden of proof on it, and the penalty there? So I think we're definitely gonna need some more discussion on it with different parties involved to figure out what's the best option for us on moving forward.
Okay. Do we, real quick, you mentioned inviting Judge Costello. Our next meeting, I think, is on the 10th. Would that be too soon?
No, I think we were
Okay,
thinking
okay,
about
so
that.
I could reach out to him and then invite him to the meeting and then let you know if he's able to join. Councilwoman Larson?
Yeah, I was just curious what the fee structure is if it's a civil violation versus the criminal fees that they're assessing now in the housing court.
So I think that penalty is up to the judge to
Yeah.
determine. There are civil penalties and this proposal indicates a civil ticket as well. So depending on if the penalty is stated in the ordinance, right, we do have a civil penalty currently for trash out early on the public right of way, which is, it states it's $50 or $100 depending on the offense. So right, that could be in there, but again, there's options if we take it to court in a civil case. It's different than if it's a criminal case, and all of our housing violations currently are criminal cases.
Yeah. Thank you.
So it might also be a good idea to have somebody from the law department talk about civil versus criminal. I had a conversation with Pam Ressner 2 years ago, and it was quite detailed about that. And she was not in favor of civil, a couple, I mean, I shouldn't speak for her, but one of my recollections was that because it's a preponderance of the evidence, it's a lot easier to prosecute. But there were other reservations, let's just say. And I think it would be, and it'd be up to Director Hannah as to whether or not somebody could come, but I would like to hear more about the consequences of making these changes. I mean, there's on the surface, you don't, I understand why, we might not want people to have a criminal record for a housing violation. But I wish I had my notes with me, but there were, I'd say 4 or 5 points that she made about this that I think should be heard by the committee.
I would like to hear that as well, because it's my understanding that with the civil case, we might be able, lump some of these properties that are all owned by the negligent landlord into one case rather than having them separately considered. Is that erroneous or?
Well, that's one of the proposals here a little bit later on is something to that end, which we can get to in a
Thank
couple
you.
minutes.
And would it be helpful if we sort of collected any questions that people might have on this topic and send them along in advance of that September meeting so that people have a chance to, so we could send an email out to people just letting them know to let you know, and then we can pass them along.
Yeah, I think that's the big point that we wanted to make tonight is that on the civil option side, there's it's many other people that are sitting in this room that should be a part of that conversation.
Great.
Just to run through it, some of these will go quickly because they're all civil. But number 2, which is an amendment to the penalty provision for housing enforcement, allowing a civil penalty. Again, that's getting to a civil option and a civil penalty. But just to bring to note, and again, I know this was Racial Justice Task Force trying to put something together, knowing that it was a work in progress. If you look at the whereases that they proposed, it talks there about looking at out-of-county, state, and country landlords, but not really anywhere else in the ordinance. So I think that's a question we'd want to talk about, particularly given some of the lawsuits that we have.
Mhm.
Is that something that we could or should do?
Mhm.
But on this one, one of the things we want to look at is apparently Warrensville has a civil penalty.
Yeah, from
Warrensville Heights.
right, a civil penalty that allows for fines if violations aren't completed in a certain amount of time. Instead of taking it to court, they just have a penalty that they apply to the landlord or property owner. I don't know if it's specific to landlords. So those are some of the mirroring legislation that we could look at to see if that's something we want to entertain. Again, if it's something that the inspector is determining, or a supervisor in that department to say, hey, who gets the penalty? Is it everybody after a certain amount of time? Right? Those are kind of options that, who do we want to have the control over making those decisions, right? Do we want the judge to do it, or do we want, the department to assess those fines?
Next up, an amendment to the housing code explicitly allowing equitable action by the city. This is again related to civil, and this is some amendments to section 134511. Penalty does not preclude other remedial action. And one of the thoughts here that the law director had is by actually defining civil/criminal, it may in fact take away the ability of the director of law to impose certain penalties. So while again the intention here was the right intention, it may in fact have an effect that we didn't want. And then it gets into some of the penalties as proposed. So that's a September 1. This is going to be a common theme here.
The unintended consequences.
Next one is an amendment to the penalty title. This is 134599. So one of the changes is the Building and Housing Commission may issue criminal penalties as follows. And then later on, the imposition of penalties for civil stuff can still happen. Same discussion, but we want to make sure that, as Alan has been saying, is it the inspector, is it the housing building commissioner, is it the judge, is it the supervisor? So defining who that person is. In another section, it talks about the mayor. So we want to make sure that we're defining who the person who's actually able to do this. So the next few are now a little bit different. I'm going to skip over for 1 second. The sixth one is access to apartments for voting information. So this one, I think we sort of have an easy answer, which is it's not something that the administration should be weighing in on, although the ordinance as proposed does invoke the city at certain points. But this is one we really feel that if the city, i.e. the council, wanted to allow this sort of thing.
Are you referring to the apartment access one? Okay.
Yeah, and we know, I think in the previous conversations, this is not necessarily something that you were, as a renter, were comfortable with, but it's not the type of thing that we wanted to weigh in on because it's really has very little to do with city
So
function.
just to share for everyone, so in this particular proposal suggested that folks who would like register voters be able to have access to apartment buildings because disproportionately tenants are more likely to be not registered. As a tenant, I personally am not in favor of this, but I don't think that I should be the only one who weighs in on this. And so I'm curious to know, how else like people feel that we should gauge whether this is something that we want to do. Is this something that we want to have like a public hearing about to hear what the community is interested in? Or is there some other way that we want to try to gauge if it's something that we should pursue?
Well, if you don't mind,
Sure.
I had a kind of quasi-public hearing about this a couple of years ago, or at least over a year ago. And, there were people that wanted to see this happen. And there is some, I believe it was a Minnesota law that, or at least a city in Minnesota that passed this, but it fit within the state code. I couldn't tell you if it fits within ours. So that was one issue. The other thing was Addie and I kind of put together this list and sent out, I'd say 100 emails, and 3 people responded, and they were like, "You got to be kidding," and and gave us 10 reasons each why this is a bad idea. One apartment building, and it might have been Judson or not Judson, but what's the Eliza Jennings maybe. They said, you could always drop stuff off at our front desk and we'll distribute it, that kind of thing. But I have to tell you, it was a pretty cold reception.
Yeah, for me personally, I really am not a fan of the idea of more people than just my neighbors going through our building. But that's just my opinion, my perspective. And so I don't want to be the single person who, prevents something that maybe people are interested in from moving forward. So if anyone happens to have an idea for how, would be the best way to gauge that, I'm open to it.
I mean, I love the idea of voter registration because you can go door to door at houses and do it. And what a shame that you can't, because all the data about voter turnout from renters versus homeowners and apartments versus homes and so forth is startling. Maybe we sign up maybe there's a way to do some kind of voluntary registration. I don't know about codifying it, but it didn't go anywhere. I even was cold calling apartment, I don't know if the owners of the realty companies.
Property managers.
Yeah. And it was all negative, so.
Chair, I know that Brian did have sort of question or idea about this, not the ordinance itself.
My comment, thank you. My comment yesterday was, so I think what this is addressing is a lack of political power or civic engagement by people that live in apartment buildings.
Yeah.
That's what it's trying to address. There was a time, and many people remember, the Cleveland Tenants Organization, and at one point they were organizing tenants to create tenant unions or whatever you might call it for each building. I think while it's not one for one, I think that would help in some way increasing the political power and civic engagement.
Trying to get that restarted, is that what you're thinking?
Get it restarted, or maybe find some of that function and be able to fund it with existing organizations in Cleveland Heights. We have I don't wanna say robust, but we have a fairly healthy fair housing budget in CDBG. And that's something I think we could look into seeing if we find an appropriate partner.
So two quick things. There was a movement last year to try to re-establish the Cleveland Tenants Organization. It didn't go anywhere, and even if they were gonna do it, I was the only non-Clevelander on these Zoom calls, and they were like, no, if we do it, we're just gonna do it in Cleveland. And then, I don't know, it fell through. Second thing,
I feel like CTO also focused on Cleveland when it wasn't.
no, I worked for them. We
okay.
did a lot of work in the suburbs. As a matter of fact, we worked out of Cleveland Heights a couple times a month at the old Unitarian Church across the street from Musicians Towers. The other thing I was going to say was I really would like us to reestablish that welcome wagon thing, because that's where that was the city's connection to new residents. And obviously, just kind of almost by definition, renters are a bit more transient than homeowners. And this was a way to get them on our email lists, to receive the city e-newsletter. Now we have a contact, information, and I don't know if it could be used for voter registration, but we could ask the law department about that kind of thing.
Do we happen to know if it's okay for the city to send out like voter registration forms? Because maybe there's a way that we just send those to
Elections
new,
does.
I'm sorry?
Doesn't the Board of Elections do that?
Yeah, I'm just not aware whether municipal governments have any restrictions. Maybe that's a good idea. Whenever we, learn of
right.
new people, we just send them voter registration forms.
But it really starts with the connection of the city to the
Yeah.
residents, and then, whether or not you have a law that says you can go into buildings, that would be less necessary, I would think, if we.
There's a lot of administrative burden with that. And, if we, through the welcome wagon or just directly sending that, maybe that's a way that we could accomplish the same thing without that administrative burden.
I'd also like to have you tried to get input from the property owners, because
Yeah.
is there anything in their lease that says you will not be solicited?
Okay.
I've lived in apartments quite a bit over my lifetime, and being in those apartments on Noble where the security doesn't exist, you can walk in the main door and then you can go right up into the apartment building itself. So I'd like to see some input from the property owners.
Okay. Are people okay with me trying to reach out and talk with people?
Sure.
You said that you had a list. Maybe Addie, we could.
Yeah, let me try and pull it up somewhere.
I know.
Doesn't it seem like-
It seemed like it was forever ago, but I'll
Yeah.
see what I can pull up. I should have.
So if I could, Gary, so what are your thoughts on this as a potential alternative?
Well, Brian hit our rationale pretty squarely here. It's an idea to increase voter turnout in the African American community, which is more heavily renters than owners. We're actually better than the national averages that way, but it's still skewed. Having the welcome wagon is a good thing, and I'm pretty sure we can hand out those forms. So I don't see why the city can't send them out to people and say register.
That would be
Key though, is what they're learning in canvassing now is the deep canvassing, where you actually talk to the person and develop a relationship works. And other canvassing doesn't work as well. And just sending someone in mail is third worst. So our idea was to try to maximize that power. how you do that safely, we did talk about a while, so we put in all that administrative stuff. In Minnesota, they had a similar kind of setup, as I read it anyway. I didn't call them up and ask, but it might be good to see from them how they think it's working.
Okay.
I think it was Minneapolis that did
As a
it,
city.
yeah.
That's something else I could take like as an action item.
There's a Secretary of State candidate, and I'm not gonna remember her name right now, but I'll look it up. She was really well versed on this, that I spoke to her a couple of years ago. I'll just have to look it up.
I just wanted to add that on the administrative burden side, there's administrative burden, which I think is part of the government function that we understand, and then there's administrative burden that becomes political. And I just want to use the example of with political signs or temporary signs that start popping up in September. We often, since our department is usually in charge of it, when we say, hey, that sign is in the wrong place, it often becomes, oh, you're only targeting us because we're this party but not that party, or we're this candidate. So that's one of the big concerns I'd have here is, oh, well, you let the free soil candidate into the building but not the Republican candidate. And so the city is now discriminating against a political party. So
You're really the history are.
Free soil.
I did that for Tony.
Okay. So there were a couple action items here, so I'll look into them and then at the next meeting, like share what updates I have on it.
Just last one, because I skipped over it. So number 5 is what Councilor Larson, part of what Councilor Larson was talking about. It's a new ordinance providing for additional tools for the city to enforce housing codes against problem landlords. And this is where we really wanted to do a lot more research because we know that there are places that are doing this. We're not sure that as written. For example, it does say create a point system, which is an interesting approach. But at one point it says, I just want to get the right language here. So once you hit 5 points, any violation above that becomes a problem. And you would, at least how we're reading it, you would get penalties for that, which the first offense being $10,000, then each subsequent one $2,500. The court may impose a receivership, which we have some concerns about that because it exists under law, but the court can't necessarily impose it, it's gotta be applied for. And then the court may padlock the premises. There's some concerns about, does that hurt the renter in the end? Obviously. So there's an example from Cincinnati that the law director wanted to look into because they were dealing with exactly the type of complaints of, landlords not having heat on in the winter and how do you get them to provide the heat. So we want to look at that more closely and either provide a different option or amend this one.
Yeah, sure.
Did Cleveland impose a emergency clause of some sort where the courts could act more quickly if it was heat, hot water, something like that?
So you guys know
In-
details on that?
I read these things, but then months and months go by, and then
I'm not familiar with any ordinance that they passed.
this would have been within the last year and a half.
Right. It's the residents first initiative.
Yeah.
And I'm not familiar with the language of it, but typically in our ordinance, there are nuisance ordinances or ordinances that would make it so that you should not occupy or habitate the property, right? So no power, no water, no heat, right, are more serious offenses. In an apartment complex, right, where you have multiple people involved, right, that's typically where a judge in a foreclosure case would say, hey, we want a receiver appointed so that the work gets completed, and rents go to one entity to work on that, right, to fix the violation. So I think there's some merit in it. It just depends on, what the case is and how we, research some of the other issues. If we can get it to court that fast, can the judge, assign that how often does the rent get paid, right? If it's due, if it's in the winter time and you have no heat, right? It's a daily issue, you wanna get it done immediately, so. I think with our nuisance ordinance and seeing what other kind of options we have with this, there may be a better option for us. But typically we're on hands-on right away, reaching out, figuring out what's going on.
Well, I've actually heard the mayor talk about this and then, condemning a building, I mean, when it's, kind of unusable, then what do? You have to force out people out, that maybe don't have an option. And then, the courts don't have the option of acting until it goes through, the failure to
Right, so
apply.
yeah, it's the balance between having the things fixed as they should be and then affecting the tenants and, the option is to kick them all out, right? And that's where we try to work in between them and whatever ordinances we have that help, right? Remediate that quicker is better, but we still need cooperation
Yeah.
for both parties.
So if I could add one thing, so along the lines of what we were talking about, I remember that in the city of Cincinnati, they have legislation that enables them to require property owners to pay for relocation expenses. Because, like we were talking about, you don't want to kick people out on the street, but at the same time, you don't want them living in really bad conditions. So I would put that out there as something that maybe that's something that we want to consider having here. So.
Yeah, my previous employment prior to coming to Cleveland Heights, we were looking at something like that, not in the case of violations, but in the case of where there was a lot of development pressure happening in the downtown. And so a lot of tenants were being displaced because of investors. So the idea was to allow for the investment to still occur, but that they would have to assist in the relocation of those businesses. And we had a legal firm helping us with that. So it's parallel, but not 100%.
Would everyone be okay with me finding the Cincinnati ordinance and sending it out, and then maybe at the next meeting we could get everyone's thoughts on it?
No, that would be interesting. Texas has a really tough law in this regard, and I was surprised. But then that begs the question, and I guess it'll be answered when we see the Cincinnati code. Is that there's always, every time you're doing something like this, does it comport with the Ohio Revised Code? The landlord tenant law.
When I was at City of Columbus, we had a relocation service.
Oh, okay.
So
Maybe take a look
Okay.
at that as well. And we did a 24-hour emergency notice for no heat, no water, infestation, bed bugs, stuff like that. And if they didn't comply, we would enforce that to remove them. And then we had relocation services get involved. And don't quote me, this is probably 15 years ago. But they would provide either temporary at a hotel or what have you, or cover the security deposit and first month rent to just get them under.
Okay.
So
Was that a city-run service?
City of Columbus, yeah.
Okay.
Department of Development, I'll probably take a peek into that and see if they're.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like those are two different approaches. So one, I think in Cincinnati, they require the property owner to figure that out. And it sounds like in Columbus, it's like a city-run service. So I'll try to find both of those and send them out for people to take a look.
And just as an anecdote, I know Hart and Gary and Gail and I were witnessed a case last year that was very disturbing, where students and other tenants were without heat over the holidays, and it was really bad. And then even when it came back on, it was a big mess. And I thought the length of time it took the owner to comply, and then they get a fine, but it's
Yep.
We got $3,000.
It's just like the cost of doing business.
yeah,
It's not a real deterrent.
right. And the most they could have gotten, am I wrong? Was it $5,000?
$5,000.
But that, yeah, they would have capped at $5,000. So not to say that isn't a fine, but it didn't. that wasn't that didn't speed it up,
Dissuade.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it just didn't,
And I don't think it would change his behavior in the future either.
Is it,
well,
was it capped at 5, but they only charged for one day? Not every day that it was, cause aren't you allowed to charge for every day
Yeah,
violation continues?
so my understanding is that, for example, the prosecutor could like make multiple charges.
Right, for yeah.
It's my understanding, and
They
I could be
don't.
mistaken, but that they often bring just a single charge against a violator.
Yeah, we started in Newburgh doing the multiple charges if you had multiple different occasions of offenses. So like say a landlord had 3 cases in a year or something like that, or 2 years.
Or is
Then
it
you-
on the books in the ordinances right now?
Here?
No, Newburgh.
Well, in Newburgh, it's just in the ordinances that you could do. It's 1 charge per day
Okay.
of time, so, and they just didn't necessarily always do that because,
but the deterrent isn't as strong as this, what sounds like this
True.
Columbus law. That seems to be the thing that mitigates the problem.
Sounds like in Columbus, that might be something provided by the city, so, maybe it's not a deterrent to the property owner, but
That's, yeah.
so I'll take a look at them and send them out.
Sure. This was recent, July.
Okay, great. Okay, W.
Maybe just read the title for everyone.
So it's Columbus City Council approves measure holding property owners responsible for relocation costs.
Great.
City of Columbus.
That's pretty literal.
yep, that's,
What a great title.
Perfect. Okay,
So that's
Sorry
it from us
for-
on this matter.
for taking us down a different path.
Yeah. So those were our
Okay.
comments for tonight, but
Okay,
we have
great.
part 2.
Okay, so just to look at my list here in terms of action items, so I'm going to invite Judge Costello to the next meeting. Also going to verify that Director Hanna is able to come and talk about the civil option. I'm going to reach out with Addie to some of the property owners to learn about their thoughts on apartment access. See if maybe someone in Minnesota I can get a hold of, and then also send out these ordinances from Cincinnati and Columbus. So we will pull that together and get that out to folks. So the next item on the agenda is an overview of housing inspections. And so earlier this year, Mr. Butler ran through this presentation for me. It was very helpful. And so I was grateful that he was willing to come and go through this for our committee. So Alan?
Welcome. So typically, when we have new council members, we'll do an onboarding process. I know during COVID, it sort of ended the ride-alongs, but we've prepared a slideshow here of basically the duties that the Housing Department and Housing Preservation Office will take care of. So our mission statement is pretty standard: to perform fair, standardized, comprehensive inspections of the properties in Cleveland Heights, to preserve the housing stock, promote higher property values, eliminate health and safety hazards, and to make the community a more desirable place. So the way we do this is a number of different inspection types. So we will do a systematic inspection. It's basically a routine inspection that we do over a certain amount of time. We'll do this for rental properties on residential every 3 years. We'll do the exterior of every owner-occupied property, a 5-year rotation. We'll do commercial inspections whenever a new business moves in, and the exterior of the property is on a 5-year rotation. We'll do point of sale, so anytime a property transfers title, they're required to have a point of sale inspection on a property. And the infancy, basically complaint inspections, right? Anytime a new department shows up for code enforcement, complaint inspections are the basis of how they get things done. We also did a Western Reserve Land Conservancy survey this year, and it's completed. You should be getting the results fairly soon. We've seen some rough drafts of the presentation, and I'm pretty happy with what the surveyors found. So hopefully you guys will be too.
You want to just mention that the basic inspection many communities has versus a more advanced.
Yeah, so typically, as I was saying, I think you're getting at the complaint inspections are kind of where the basic inspections that any new department does, right? And anybody can make a complaint. But going through and proactively, doing the inspections on rentals every 3 years, and proactively going out in the neighborhood and checking every owner occupied property to canvass that neighborhood and kind of figure out, where the problem properties are. So if you're kind of
Not every community
No.
does that.
No, for sure. Rarely do they do that. And we have an older community, right? So, the average median home build is 1925, I believe. So everything's creeping up on a century home.
If I could, Councilwoman Larson, did you have a question?
Yes, I was just curious, when we get to see the results from that Case Western survey, will it be in a form that we can all access the data easily? I mean, if they set it
Yeah.
up so it's user friendly?
Yeah, it's interactive and it's
That's what I was looking for.
it's pretty impressive.
It's a storyboard type
Yeah.
of.
Like Cleveland had, that's how Cleveland's was set up.
Yeah, along with, there's just a big load of data associated with it, and that data will also be put on the NST website, NeoCanDo, so you can sort and manipulate that data with that website as well.
Thank you.
In terms of progress, how are we doing? Are we roughly current with inspections?
As far as the systematic neighborhood inspections, we've got almost a full staff now. I've got 2 new hires coming on to finish out the staff, and they're starting in the beginning of September, and I'll have a full staff. And everybody's, I think we're on board.
What about the complaint inspections?
So the complaint inspections, we switched over to a different platform. It's SeeClickFix. So there's a number of different ways that you can submit a complaint inspection. The way I prefer to do it is to go on our website and log into CitizenServe, which is our platform, and actually submit a complaint on there. It goes directly to our staff, and then we could set out an inspector for that. So you can also track that inspection then in real time if you're logged in to see any documents or notices that got sent out for that property.
Would you say we're roughly current with that, or is there a backlog?
Yeah, no, for new inspections or for new complaints, we process them within a day.
Oh, okay.
We're out there looking at them. Whether or not a notice gets sent out, right, or you see compliance on it, that's right.
Another
that's a
issue.
different story, right? We're always trying to get, that compliance, and that could take years.
Can you remind me, Safe Built, where are we at with that?
As far as,
Are we eliminating them?
so I think there's always gonna be a need for Safe Built to provide service for us. We are using them currently for inspections. On building, right, so building inspections for certain inspections, like commercial inspections. But our contract recently changed with them from a percentage of permit costs to a inspection basis cost. So they're now getting paid only by the inspections that they perform. For my department and the housing department, we don't use Safe Built at all, right? So all my inspectors are city employees. We have a new building commissioner, right, who's a city employee. And then we've also got offers out to building inspectors to have building inspectors perform our own inspections for permitted items like, new construction.
Is there a different certification for that than?
Yes.
Okay,
And it's a
and is
state,
that why we use Safe Built for that in particular?
correct. And we didn't have the capacity or the people to have our own in-house building department per state regulations, right? The state governs that, and if you don't have it, then you can't have your own local building department. So all those positions require backups as well, and that's where typically most communities either share with another community for a backup or use Safe Built as a backup in case we don't have the proper personnel. So this slide basically goes over the ordinances and registrations that we have to to help enforce the code. So basically, the main thing is our property maintenance code. It's part 13 of our building code, Title 5 and 7. We also have a nuisance abatement ordinance. It basically addresses any tall grass, any demolition of properties, any repairs on properties, board ups, police action and or trash. We have a rental registration. We require all properties that are rented have a registration. Currently, we have about 3,600 registrations for multi, singles, and two families. The city requires any vacant property be registered and assign a local agent for that. We approximately have about 300 of those on file right now. We've passed the out-of-county owner registration. And this is for any person who owns a property in the city who lives outside of Cuyahoga County to register and pay a fee for that and assign a local agent to that. There's some current legislation or litigation on this, which is in the works, and law department and I are working through it. We passed a foreclosure bond registration, so anytime a property is foreclosed on, the plaintiff of the property, if the property is vacant, needs to submit the city a deposit of $15,000 for the repairs that may be needed for that property. Currently, we have 30 on file.
So on the topic of the registrations, what's your guess at like the compliance rate? So like the rental registry, do we think that like almost all rental units are accounted for there, or?
So I would say the majority of them, right? Whether or not they're currently active, we know which ones they are for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Single families are always going to be the ones that vary a little bit more. But we know the two families, we know the multis, right? Those aren't going to change. Depending on whether or not the year that the person is current on the payment for that registration. But I would say typically we have 80 to 90% paid and no balance due on them.
Okay.
But yeah, it's always a chore on finding the new ones and usually a tenant will call complaining about the property and will say, oh, we don't have this rented, right, listed as a rental. I think single family rentals are a good way to assess the sort of the thriving community aspect. The more rental properties you have on a single family basis, in my opinion, sort of devalues the neighborhood base, right? The more owner occupants we can have in a property on a single family basis, the better.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say that it looks like it usually varies with property values, right? So if property values aren't up and you can't sell the property for what you want, your option is to rent it. And with property values going up recently in the past year or so, you're seeing fewer single family rentals and more sales on those.
Okay.
Tax delinquent rental ordinance was passed, and so this basically states that anytime you have a tax delinquency with the Cuyahoga County, that you are not allowed to have an occupancy permit to rent that property. So this is a little tricky on enforcement, but we typically post the property, notify the tenant that there's a tax delinquency on the property, and then that forces either the tenant to, put his rent in escrow or the landlord to get on a payment plan with the county. So we passed a lead safe clearance ordinance for rental properties recently. So it's in an infancy on figuring out the process on that. We have already had a number of them on the rollout for the neighborhoods. So we're working on making every rental property is required to have it. It basically says this has an inspection and there's no lead hazards on the property.
And we're gonna talk more about that next week.
So you're gonna talk about the zones, cause you don't have the capacity to do all the rentals in the city.
Right, so we rolled it out in a zone platform. And then also the creation of the CIC here to help us on the economic development and acquiring vacant abandoned properties and getting them into a tax productive status. So our housing preservation office is sort of the carrot, right? The grant programs, the help that we have for the stick, which is our housing inspection department. So we send out violation notices, but these are the programs that we have to help homeowners. They've changed a little bit over the last couple of years, trying to make them a little more simplified. We do complete renovation loans, either deferred loan or a zero interest loan for seniors. We have two grant programs available, a senior grant program and just a home repair grant program. And depending on your age, which ones you qualify for. Right now, we can give a grant of up to $5,000 per instance, capping out at a max per lifetime. We also have the Lead Safe Cuyahoga program that we've been in for probably since 1998. I think we've been repairing and eliminating lead hazards on properties throughout the city. We also have a nuisance abatement process, and our housing preservation office usually administers most of the bids, the specs, the repairs on those. So we can either fix a property, cut the grass, demo a property. There's a number of different options we have with nuisance abatement. The city, in conjunction with HRRC, has a down payment assistance program. So we help new homeowners who qualify, get their down payment paid for through a loan. And then coming soon, this is probably should be in there now. We have the lead certification reimbursement. So we have a program now. We're reimbursing landlords who have gotten their certification for their lead on their rental. And then with the ARPA funding coming up, we're looking to expand some of these programs that we already have and at least make that outreach a little bit bigger on some of the income requirements that some of the other federal programs that we have don't reach.
If someone's interested in learning more about the program, should we direct them to the Housing Preservation Office?
Correct.
Okay.
And a lot of this info, right, is on the violation notices that we send out, right? So anytime a violation notice is sent out, right, it'll have this info, the phone number for HRRC, for housing preservation. Contact us, if you have any problems taking care of your violations. So yeah, we wanna get the word out. I drive around the neighborhood and I see right everywhere that of a house we've fixed or repaired or people that we've helped. So it's definitely doing a work.
On the final entry there where you say expanded ARPA programs, are besides reimbursing homeowners for lead issues, we're also talking about reimbursing landlords too, or they wouldn't be homeowners, they'd be renters. So would it just be landlords that are getting reimbursed under the ARPA money that the council allocated?
So right now we're not using ARPA for that reimbursement, right?
We're not using city ARPA, we're using state ARPA for the lead clearance
Yes.
program. Okay, so we're reimbursing the contractor so that they can reimburse the property.
Sure.
Right, and our ordinance basically states that the landlords, it's for rental property that's required on the ordinance.
Yeah.
Right, not owner occupied. There could be a discussion whether or not we, if an owner occupant has a clearance on their own property, if we wanna encourage that, but currently the ordinance is only for requiring it for rental property.
So the $1 million that we allocated still would be something you'd use, it's obligated, right? And this ARPA question that we're talking about.
So I think we have lead safe ARPA money, and then we also have exterior repair.
Yes, yes, true.
And that's where that bullet doesn't tell you much, but we wanna have conversations with down the road about whether it's engaging HRC to do some more work on our behalf.
Yeah.
And if we encumber it with them, then we're good to go for
this year.
Yeah.
There's also down payment assistance.
Down payment, so-
Allocation as well,
Yeah, that's an ARPA conversation that we wanna have soon.
Thank you.
sooner.
And that's it.
Great. Thank you so much. Any other questions for Mr. Butler? Okay, so just one more thing on the agenda. So after the cornice collapse in Cedar Fairmount neighborhood over the weekend, I reached out to Mr. Eric Elmy and I invited him, and he shared a statement with me that I just wanted to read with folks. He said, according to fire department, the incident happened around 2:30 a.m. on Sunday. Fire Inspector Jim Strabe and myself were on site early morning conducting our inspections. We met with structural engineers who will provide their observations on how to proceed. Debris were removed from sidewalks yesterday. The storefronts and sidewalks will be closed until we obtain structural engineer reports. You'll be notified as soon as we get more info. And he said that we're welcome to send him questions. So if anyone happens to have questions for him, feel free to reach out. One last thing, I said that was the last thing, but actually one more thing. We have a second meeting this week. So at 4 p.m. on Thursday, August 22nd, we have a walking tour of the Boulevard neighborhood at the request of Mr. Paul Greenberg. So we are going to meet at 3248 Euclid Heights Boulevard. And from there, he will show us different things in his neighborhood. And with that, is there anything else that anyone would like to bring up? Okay, well, I am adjourning this meeting at 5:57 p.m.
Thank you.